What's up, world? This is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I want to welcome you back to another edition of Family Talk with my pops, Wayne Carter. Pops, how's it going with you today?
Doing good, doing good. We had a pretty silent and easy fourth.
Yeah, it was pretty pleasant. We were talking a little bit before we got on here, and I actually went to sleep on the front porch in my front porch swing while there was neighborhood folks setting fireworks, but there wasn't anybody too close to me, so it didn't bother me much at all. I kind of had a pleasant evening, and so I didn't have to set off any fireworks, so that was nice too. Um, it's interesting, and I probably think too much and think about a bunch of different things all at once. But I was kind of looking back over our past conversations and really just kind of meditating on this 250-year anniversary of this experiment we call the United States. And it seems like even within your life and in this thing we've kind of been discussing as far as the American dream and really just in people in general, there is this duality. And in your life, we kind of talked about your idea of the American dream was really being able to travel and not having this attachment. But it's interesting as we followed your narrative, you really kind of maybe followed a traditional path, maybe not in the traditional way, but you still kind of followed this path from high school into, kind of the labor market and into higher education, and now you're at your advanced education portion or your advanced training portion. Um, did you have any kind of consciousness of that at the time, or were you just kind of going with the flow? What did you think about kind of how your life was shaping up? Now, in our narrative of your life, we've got you right around 25, and you're going into law school and expecting a first child, and kind of got this young family, which really follows this kind of maybe traditional conservative lifestyle, but uh, you holding these maybe more progressive uh, values of freedom without having these attachments. Is there something about the duality of man in that? Did you have any conscious idea of that at the time?
At the time, I doubt whether I had any conscious thought about duality. As I recall, uh, I had a goal of wanting to go to law school, and trails that we take, or I took, were ultimately going to come back to that goal of going to law school. And now looking back at it, I see what you're saying, but looking back at it, I think it's kind of like, looking back at your life and seeing God's finger there a whole lot and don't really realize it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's pretty normal. It's always hindsight is 2020, right? So to
Exactly.
speak. Um, and so when we've kind of talked about it here and there, when do you feel like you solidified this goal of going to law school? Because we've talked about it, and Granddad said you told him early on when you were in primary school that you wanted to be a lawyer, and he kind of had the faith in you to do it. But we also kind of talked that maybe that was some of his nostalgia coming into play with that, and you didn't really know if at that young if you had that kind of interest in it. When do you feel like you kind of solidified that goal for yourself?
probably while I was at Methodist College and getting I guess attention from Dr. Tobler, who was the head of the political science department there when I was there, and his friendship.
Okay.
Because I think about Dad and I what I do remember was enjoying Perry Mason on TV. you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and still in looking at how you developed in your young life, or at least how you perceived it, and this idea of what you saw as freedom and being able to kind of move about the country and be able to live and to work. And you did that through the military a bit, and through that process while continuing your undergraduate education, you feel like you developed this affinity for the law and created this goal. Did maybe some of just the economic times help push you into this more traditional lifestyle? Because you mentioned before that, kind of because of the housing market and because you had been in the military, it was pretty easy for you to buy a house anywhere you went at the time. And we're talking about, from Mississippi to Carolinas up to Maryland, and the different kind of, so it kind of indicates to me that the housing market was pretty stable at the time. And in addition to your service and the things that you had done in your life, you were able to, it was better for y'all to buy anywhere you were at than to kind of try to rent or anything like that. Was that kind of
Well, we
accurate?
didn't really buy everywhere we went. The only place we bought was in Fayetteville, Fort Bragg
Okay.
area. I mean, in Mississippi and Maryland, we rented, apartments
Okay.
and stuff. So.
All right. All right. Another thing that I was thinking about with that and kind of that duality of, you having this want to move, but then kind of creating this security in your life, right? And I kind of alluded to it earlier. That is something that is very human. It's even as far as the species, right? As a species, we are migratory as far as following resources and being able to kind of deal with the change of when the environment changes. We moved to different places, and I'm speaking of saying we as a species moved to places that were better suited for us. But at the same time, we've had this ability to kind of have a long term thinking about security and securing, our needs for the future and establishing kind of more secure settlement type communities. So there's a duality just in the human species there that may be represented in you as well, in this want to be able to move as you feel you need to, but then at the same time establishing this security for yourself and what is coming to be a young family. We think about
Yeah,
that.
I think that the going from place to place, traveling, uh, was really put there by the military. I never traveled, but going. I expected the military to be tough, but when you get outside of, for example, basic training, when you get outside that mode of training, basic training, and you meet people in the local communities, uh, I've been very lucky and had pretty much just positive experience with meeting people wherever they were and getting along. I think that's part of the way we were raised to respect folks. Go back to the construction. You better be nice to the guy that's you're working for or with, because he may be in charge of the next one. So you just treat people decently. Uh, and going to Mississippi and the Bragg and the Maryland and over to Europe and the Mid East. I've told you this many times, I'm sure, but I think people are just really people. And the average guy wants to get by. He wants his family to do well. He wants to have it's the leadership that often gets us in the situations. So I've been lucky to wherever I've been to find folks. We remember to Mexican Hat, Utah, when you were younger, and the people we met there were just decent folks, poor, working hard people.
Yeah, I remember even playing basketball with some of those kids from around there, just an outside court they had. But and I don't mean to take away from your military service and try and kind of inspiring you to travel, but you spoke about even as you were younger and wanting to be in the woods, of kind of that idea of freedom being a detachment from needing the regular everyday aspects of life and being able to be on the move, and that kind of idea of freedom. I just think there's probably something ingrained in the species that causes us to want to be on the move.
You're right. I really didn't think about that. I think you're right. Yeah.
But it's also interesting, and I wonder if, I think that it's true that there's also something ingrained in the species for us to establish security of our basic needs, and that being shelter and water and food. So I think that maybe that drove you as far as, wanting to get a good education and wanting to have a solid career, even when you didn't quite know what that career was going to be, and then getting to the point where you set the goal of going to law school. I think all that is kind of tied to that same kind of primitive drive that's in our species as well. And that's what we talk about when we talk about the duality of man represented there.
And I have to go back, and maybe it's just the mindset, but I think the military was a good part of that security for me. Even now, if I get to a military post, I feel safe.
Sure.
If we were the very small part, going out on patrol somewhere, when you get back close to the military post, you feel safe again. And I think I always had in the back of my mind that if everything else don't work out, I can go back full time in the Army.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so there was those two things that I've kind of recognized throughout our conversation. And then there's also some other things, like, I wonder, did you feel any kind of expectations in your life at that point, or even when you were younger, that you felt, you at least felt the expectation maybe of going to work and contributing or to the household or maintaining yourself by that means? Did you feel any other expectations beyond that in your life?
Well, I think, truth be known, that I always wanted to be a trial lawyer. And I always knew that meant that I had to work harder than the other side, because if I wanted to develop the facts, I had to find the facts, and that meant work, go out and do it. So I think in the back of my mind, that's what I always really wanted to do. And then, I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of the story, but when I had the opportunity to go with the district attorney's office to be in court every day if I wanted to be, or every week, whatever it took to be in trial, that was kind of a dream come true.
Yeah, and so since you kind of brought us up to where I wanted us to be, and kind of in your biographical sketch or this historical narrative of your life, we've got you in your first semester at law school and expecting your first child, and really going through a pretty stressful transition in your life. You've kind of gone through these other transitions, but as you said, you were really just other than the expectations of providing for yourself, you didn't really feel anything beyond that, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, there's another life that you feel obligated in a bit and an expectation of providing for, right?
Yeah.
And so you mentioned a couple of things uh, after our last meeting, and you that were pretty important things that just kind of happened that just kind of fell into place as it needed to be, right? And one was y'all moving a transition of y'all moving from a house in Smyrna to a house in Lebanon, Tennessee, correct? Tell us about that transition and what that kind of entailed just for our story because we're following where you've lived at and with that we've kind of followed what churches you've been going to and things like that. So tell us about the transition over to Lebanon and where y'all started going to church and stuff like that and about when that happened.
Yeah, and I got to say this. What I'm about to tell you reminds me a little bit about reading the Old Testament. I'm not really sure specifically of which came first. These events were there, but I'm not sure of the timeline. And that's kind of how I look at reading some of the events in the Old Testament. They happened, but where they happened in that particular timeline, I'm not sure. But um, Rachel was born. We were living in Smyrna when Rachel was born. Rachel was born in Rutherford County, which is Murfreesboro, Tennessee, at Rutherford County Hospital. I was considering probably for the first time in my life to quit something, and that would have been law school because I just, like you had alluded to earlier, I had this feeling that I had to make sure I took care of this new baby, and things kind of worked out where I think Jim and Laverta were maybe living in Florida, and they had the home over in Wilson County, and so it came up that's actually I think he just built that house, and so they were still living in Florida and then transitioning back, and anyway they offered for us to stay over there. Well, that took care of a mortgage payment that I wasn't going to have to take care of, so I didn't have to make the money that I was making to have a mortgage payment. Also about that, and I was working construction, and as you can imagine, that wore me out to both work and then try to go to school pretty much full time. Uh,
Like
through,
doubling a commute, right? Because you're commuting to the work site, then you're having to commute home and then commute to Nashville to go to school, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that was tough, and so through some people that I met who later became obviously very good friends of mine, uh, I had an opportunity to get a job working with the district attorney's office in Nashville as an investigator in their child support division. Well, that takes away, as you just mentioned, that commute to having to go back and forth, and because I'm wearing pretty decent clothes, and I'm not just getting nasty all the time working construction. If I'm working as a DA's office, and I'm in Nashville already, so I could get off work and go straight to class. Well, that was just a big deal, and kind of a sidebar to that, the person that was primarily uh, the reason I got that job ended up being a circuit court judge in Cookeville. And so that's another story for another day. But just, some people that God put in my path became friends. We studied together. She was working, this person was working, she was the director of the child support division in the DA's office in Nashville at the time, and was going to law school. That's kind of how we met. Um, it just worked out.
Yeah.
And so that was that was huge. And at the time, I don't know. I've thought about it in that context in a while. How all that had to come together in a few months.
Yeah. So it's just a nice little, you know, we have our personal beliefs, but there's this maybe a philosophical discussion of uh, random, chaotic course of events or some design or order in the universe that causes all these things to happen. Um, but regardless, it really, just like we've highlighted in the past, it was community that came together that kind of supported you, even if it wasn't in a way of saying, hey, we need to come together and support this guy, but these different pieces in your life, these different parts of your community were interconnected to to make you have the opportunity for success.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I'll go back, and I've said this just earlier, but I just think it's worth making a big deal out of is treating people along the way decently. Because when I first met this person who got me this job in the DA's office, who later became a judge, I had no clue who she was, or what. We just studied together, and it
Yeah.
just worked out.
So you've still, I mean, just a whole lot going on in your life where you're going to law school, transition. What was it like in that vocational transition from construction to be an investigator for the DA's office? What was that
It was
like?
it, it was fantastic. I have to say it because I'm actually in the field where I want to be. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not practicing law. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not there yet. I'm just first year of law school, but I'm actually in a position where I'm exposed to the legal process every day. It was, and what happened later on after I'd been there for a couple of years, the there's a Supreme Court rule that allows seniors in law school to actually practice law under the guidelines if they're working for a district attorney or somebody else that will supervise that. And so my senior year in law school, I was actually been able to go to court and do some things in front of Judge Muriel Robinson, of one that I remember. Muriel, I'm sure retired by now, but she was a fantastic circuit court judge there in Nashville. Later taught at the Nashville School of Law, uh, but got to do that, got that experience, and understanding how important the clerks were. And you really need to make sure you get along and friends with the clerks because they can make you or break you. And those sort of things was a well just a valuable experience in my learning how to practice law.
Really the nuts and bolts
Yeah,
of the job,
right,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
Um, you kind of are gaining your expertise in the class and the school and the training at school and kind of those, I'm sure y'all did like moot cases and trials, prepping for you though in those things. But like you say, dealing with the clerks and seeing kind of maybe the down and dirty aspects of the job, the trade of it.
well, yeah, and being an investigator, I had to be taught how to interview somebody to be, to gain facts, and you learn to ask a question and shut up and listen
Yeah.
rather than try to tell them what you want them to say.
Do you think that that's, and it goes along with the same experience you kind of felt like you had in the military becoming an officer?
Yeah.
It goes along with the experience you said kind of going into your undergraduate work because you had already been in the labor field, and already kind of had some experience in that. How vital was that kind of real world and down and dirty experience of the job? Was it in your career overall?
Oh, 80% of what you do is outside, and as a trial lawyer, is outside the courtroom, and half of that is interviewing and talking to people. And if I don't hear what you say, then I'm really losing it. And you can get embarrassed if you don't hear what somebody's going to say, and you put them on the witness stand, and you really don't know what they're going to say. It can be embarrassing. So it is very, very critical.
Yeah. Hmm. That's interesting, and it's something else that is kind of coming through is that idea of having to work harder than the next guy, or at least having to be prepared, having to do that work beforehand to be prepared to perform kind of effectively. Um,
Yeah, I think that goes through a lot of stuff, at least for me in life. Because I'm fairly average intelligence, not a natural. Believe it or not, was not a natural born person who wanted to get up in front of a group and talk. And so doing those things and learning those things that you had to work hard to be prepared was critical. And I preached this morning. Uh, I drafted the sermon, you know, uh, days before, and so I go over the sermon time and two or three times a day for a week, and tweaking the language, tweaking the words, preparing. So by the time I get to preaching the sermon, I know it, and so that's just preparation.
yeah. And even, there's an old saying that, hard work beats talent, right? And it's like whatever you're practicing, and I guess another old saying, that's what you're going to do when it's time to perform. And even if you've got all the talent, if you're not doing the work, if you're not prepping, it's more likely that you're going to have a mistake or not know how to handle something when it's time to perform. And really, part of the prep for later in your career is all these other smaller steps kind of in the field, right? Getting that real world experience and, having that background of respecting others and how you kind of deal with those interpersonal relationships and kind of creating that community for yourself throughout the different places in your life. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that again, and my bias comes through, but my military experience, particularly at the staff level, when I was battalion commander, comes through with the idea that there's you need to prepare as much as you possibly can, but there's going to be things that happen that you're not prepared for. That's going to happen, but you don't need
Right.
to don't leave that to be the norm.
Right.
You need to be able to function in what normal is, and then respond to emergencies.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense. And that's kind of applicable in any field, right? Anything that you're trying to do, you need to prep and kind of game plan for the what ifs and when things go wrong. Not if they go wrong, but when they go wrong.
Yeah.
All right, Pops. Well, once again, we haven't made it very far, but we're kind of at a point where, you're in law school, you've got this young child, and you're still serving in this reserve component of the military and starting this new job as well. That's kind of shifting you into your career path, right? The new job is putting you into that career path. You've got your young family and also this military service, which is really going to start becoming more active in the 80s. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, I'd say it does, and then of course the night, yeah, I mean because 90 is Desert Storm, 91 is Desert Storm, yeah, that's right.
But those journey, you start going back and forth to Germany a few times. So
Yeah,
I want to take our time and kind of, uh, you take a little time and reflect on that time in your life, and kind of work our way through that. All right, Pops. Well, I appreciate you once again. Really look forward to when we get together to do this. Appreciate anybody that takes the time to give a listen or a watch. As always, this has been Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.